Today, we're going to talk about fear, and we're going to talk about fear of failure. FEAR, fear. So, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about what is fear of failure, why do you have it, why it's making decisions for you in the background when you don't even notice. And then we're going to talk about FOPO, the fear of other people's opinions, and the trend that we're seeing in terms of the fear of other people's opinions. And then we're going to talk about how to overcome that fear of failure. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So, hi, everyone. AJ Shavell. I'm a resilience coach and leader. I write about resilience, mindset, and leadership, really talking about growth. And one of the key topics I've seen over the last 2 to 3 years is that fear of failure and not understanding what it's doing to you from the inside out. So, that's what we're going to talk about today. So, the first question: what is fear? Your fear is an instinctual response that prepares you to react to any of those potential threats. It's there to help you. When you encounter something that scares you, your brain, it goes into fight or flight mode. And the fear is there to help you. It's to help you notice that there is a threat, that there is a problem that you need to look out for. The problem with today is that our brain hasn't caught up with the technology and the landscape of today. We have so much fear that comes into our bodies that we can feel, and you notice it, whether it's in your throat, in your chest, in your stomach, or somewhere else. The fear that's programmed into our bodies in terms of our kind of monkey mind is we look at threats like everything is a lion that's coming across the corner, when really it might just be fear of something simple. So that's where we need to start to get in some of the processes, some of the tools, and some of the habits to think about what truly is that fear. So, that first piece, when it comes to fear, we look at all those threats the same exact way. So, when that fear, our body thinks it might be a lion or it might be an animal that's coming up against us, today we haven't caught up with the technology. So, that might be fear of embarrassment. It might be fear of other people's opinions. It might be the fear of rejection that goes on. And so that's why we're going to talk about why fear of failure is so important. So today, fear of failure is an overwhelming concern about the possibility of failing. It's when you think that you're not going to achieve your goals, when you don't think you're going to meet society's standards. And this happens with children, this happens with young adults, this happens with teenagers, it happens with adults as well. You see it in people. What you start to see in the actions when you start to see that fear of failure is that people start to avoid challenges. They start to stop trying new things because that anxiety of failing or not succeeding is completely overcoming them. So when you think about it, it's the fear of playing ultimately together. You're not playing to win, you're just playing not to lose in the mind of life at that moment. And when you think about what is fear of failure, why do you have it? Well, the fear of failure usually isn't about failing itself. It's about the fear of the emotions that you associate with what failure means to you. So, what are you going to feel if you fail? So, some examples. Say you apply to a college and you don't get it. It's not the fear of failing altogether. It's the fear of what that rejection would look like if you get that rejection letter. It's the fear or the shame of the embarrassment that you feel like you're going to feel, or the weight of other people's opinions. If you think about it, it's less about the fall and more about the daunting shadows cast by your own insecurities and the perceived reactions of those around you. And that's where, when you start to think about the fear, that's where you want to talk to it. You want to challenge it. You want to think about it in a completely different way. And that's where this heightened fear and anxiety can lead to less engagement in social and growth situations. The fear implies anxiety and distress resulting from potential negative judgments by others. And that's where it's leading to less engagement in what we're seeing in people today. And it's impacting growth, because the true growth you have is when you try something new, when you have the courage to do something that you wouldn't otherwise ultimately do. And that's where that fear of failure is inhibiting people from their willingness to take new risks, because to grow, you have to get outside of your comfort zone. It blocks your willingness to explore new opportunities. And then it also can impede the social and emotional development of people. And so that's where we need to think about what is the fear causing. And then ultimately, at the end of this conversation, we're going to talk about how you can actually overcome that fear of failure. And so, one of the key things that we're starting to see is the fear of other people's opinions. And that really drives some of that fear of failure, the fear of trying new things. So, FOPO is your fear of other people's opinions. It's when you're anxious or always on high alert or looking for signs where others might disapprove of you. This constant worrying about what others think is going to affect your mind. It's going to affect your body. It's going to affect your habits as you start to think what you're truly going to do. And to be honest, in today's society, I think social media has made everything worse because it's giving you nonstop ways to seek the approval and also face criticism in other ways. You're always playing that comparison game, and it might stop you from actually looking into what you want to be doing. And so this is where that it matters, because it's going to stop personal, it's going to stop professional growth, and it's going to lead to anxiety and reduced performance. At the end of the day, it's going to compromise your authenticity and your fulfillment in terms of what you actually want to do. And so this is where, when it comes to fear, and we're going to talk about how you can start to overcome that fear, it really requires a shift in the language, the mindset, and the behavior of what you want to be doing. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the importance of self-awareness. So when it comes to seeing fear in yourself, you first need to be aware of it. You first need to understand why it's occurring. And so that's where, when I say the word fear and you think about where you've had past fears, think about where it's going in your body. So some people might have it in their throat. Some people might have it in their chest and get a tightness in their chest. Some people might have it down at their stomach as they start to see the information of what they're doing. And so this is where you need to first build up that self-awareness and understand where it's coming from. So the first step in terms of really changing your language and mindset on the fear of failure is exactly that. The first thing you want to do is change. Change the way you're thinking about failure, fear, and the way you go into high pressure or pressure situations. You have to understand that step number one, that change, that failure is a part of your journey to success. If you look at any successful people, you look at James Dyson, you look at Michael Jordan, you look at Oprah, anyone who has been successful in their career, they've had failures along the way. And they think about that failure not as an endpoint, but a learning experience that provides valuable lessons and insight. You need to accept that you don't fear failure, but you fear the feelings associated with it, such as embarrassment and rejection. People who view failure as a learning opportunity tend to be more resilient and successful in the long run. So the first step, change your language and your mindset on the fear of failure. The next step, let's talk about proof. Give yourself proof when you've done something to overcome that fear. Reflect on a past success, like you've given a successful project or you've done successful work. Think about any time you've mastered the courage to do something, whether it was riding your bike for the first time. Maybe it was trying a new sport, trying a new instrument, and start to think about how you felt going into those first performances, going into the first trials. You probably had a lot of fear, but you overcame it and it led to an outcome, a positive outcome, or maybe a productive outcome. So this is where you need to give yourself those historical wins. Think about your top 10 wins of getting over courage and give yourself the proof that you've done it before and that you can do it again. The next step, if you think about first changing your language about it, then giving yourself proof, we're building you up to know that you've done this before and you're building up the confidence. The next is Think about how you're planning and going through what the fear truly is. So, this is where go through a fear setting exercise. Write down your fear and go through the worst case scenario. Suppose you're hesitant about going to a new school. List down the worst case scenarios like not making friends immediately or having trouble in terms of your academics or maybe not being able to get onto the sports teams. Then detail the steps to prevent these, whether it is in the example of friends, joining clubs, initiating conversations, um, starting up maybe one new conversation a day. This is where you can start to look at ways to repair the situation if it happens. So, what you're trying to do is you're trying to think about that fear and quantifying the fear. What are the percentages that it's actually going to happen? How bad is it truly going to be? And most times, when you start to write down and actually go through and plan it, you realize the fear isn't as big as you've made it out in your mind. Ultimately, you're being able to think about what that fear is and defining that fear as you go through. Some other things to think about before we talk about the action steps in terms of habits and emphasizing it and pushing yourself. Some other things that you need to think about is when you're trying to build up your identity and thought process about fear, you need to think about how you can embrace vulnerability, practice some self compassion with yourself, and ultimately think about your identity as a person. So, not breaking yourself down, but how can you build yourself up when it comes to practicing self compassion? So, be kind to yourself. Think about treating yourself with the same compassion you would offer a friend. What this is going to do, this is going to reduce the anxiety and stress associated with the fear of other people's opinions, the fear of failure. And it's ultimately going to improve your resilience and performance. You're going to start to increase that, improve and increase that self talk that you have. Instead of just the activities we're talking about, instead of just listening to the fear and listening to your mind, you're talking back at yourself and starting to change the language that you have in terms of accepting your imperfections and embracing the vulnerability that you have as you go into these new scenarios. So now we talked about building yourself up. How can you actually take those steps and walk through that fear? And so the first thing is think about how you can actually push yourself. At the end of the day, the solution to overcoming fears, you're going to have to push through it. As Ryan Holiday says, the obstacle is the way. So this is where you can't avoid challenges due to fear. It's only going to reinforce the fear. It's the principle of reinforcement. This is where you need to start to step outside your comfort zone and accept that there will be challenges that come along the way. And you have to accept what the price is for what you're going to challenge. So the quickest way to deal with fear is to confront it and do what you're afraid of anyway. Just push on through as you go through. It's not ignoring your feelings as you go into it, but accepting them and accepting that you do need to push yourself at some point. You don't need to feel confident or comfortable to take action. It's just being able to know that you can take action in spite of some of the discomfort and fear that you might have. So think about being able to go into a sports situation where you've got the fear of failure or the pressure that goes into the game. Think about what is the worst case scenario, how you can improve if you do have a horrible game. How can you actually improve your performance over time? And that's where the only way you're going to improve is by actually playing the game and overcoming that fear as you go through. The next thing is emphasize the doing and your focus rather than the thinking. So emphasize where you are focusing. So the key message is to emphasize trying rather than focusing solely on your thinking. This is where mindfulness and self-awareness becomes very important. So in the example I just gave, say you were trying for a basketball game in this example, and you're pushing yourself to go through a pressure situation. This is where you need to be able to practice mindfulness and focus while you're playing in the game. How do you set up a pre-game checklist to acknowledge your feelings, but also set you up for success? You want to acknowledge those feelings, but not be controlled by them. The excitement, the fear is there to actually help you. And you need to thank it when it's there. And this is where you can start to, when you think about doing rather than thinking, create action oriented goals for each day. Think about how you can build momentum and think about how you can always be present and focus your thoughts from being able to think about your performance and what you are doing in this moment rather than your feelings or way out into the future in terms of achievements. You need to focus on the process rather than the outcome when you're trying. The last step is the habit. You need to build the habit of taking risks. And I think about this as how can I develop the habit of courage? Make risk taking a regular practice. When you start to do more things and start to think about how you've failed at other things, this is where you develop a growth mindset with everything you do. You're focusing on mastery and excellence versus failure. And there's a famous story from the CEO of Spanx, Sarah Blakely, former CEO of Spanx, where she talked about how she would come home to dinner and her dad would ask her, "What did you fail at today?" What you're doing by asking that question is you're shifting your mindset to think about how am I building courage and taking risks and taking calculated risks. So to start off with this habit, start with small risks like trying a new food or proposing a new idea that maybe you didn't. Maybe speak up in a class or speak up in a project that you normally wouldn't. Like any habit or exercise, your strength is going to grow over time. It's going to feel uncomfortable at first. That's why you start small and gradually increase the stakes as you become more comfortable with uncertainty. A lot of what we do is pre-programmed into our habits and pre-programmed into the activities of what we do. And that's why I think fear becomes so important because it's a conversation of how can I overcome that fear over time. You need to stop thinking about falling into the fear, but how can I build courage as a habit? How can I try new things? And how can I embrace the unknown as we start to think about our comfort zone being here and really growing outside of it? Because that's where true growth happens. And that's where you can think about the art of resilience as you start to go into these new scenarios. So I know we'll have a Q&A after this. Happy to answer any of the questions that you might have. And I'm excited to meet everyone.